Some of the people who seem to care the least are actually the ones who feel the most, but they've spent a lifetime learning that showing it isn't safe. You ever meet someone who seems calm, collected, almost untouched by emotion, yet something in their eyes tells you it's not that simple? Avoidant people often get mislabeled as cold, selfish, or uninterested. But the truth? Many of them care deeply. They just learned somewhere along the way that letting someone close feels like handing over the key to a room where all their fears are stored, and that terrifies them. Avoidants don't shut down because they don't feel. They shut down because they're overwhelmed by feeling. When someone gets close, emotionally close, it touches a part of them that's been unprotected for a long time. Vulnerability starts to feel less like connection and more like walking into a spotlight with no armor. This is why avoidants often pull away right when things start to feel good. Not because they don't value you, but because closeness activates something old, an old fear of disappointment, engulfment, or abandonment. Their instincts tell them retreat, regulate, get safe again. But here's the important part. Avoidants aren't hopeless. They're not incapable of love. They're not trying to sabotage connection. They're protecting themselves with the only strategy they've trusted for years. And when someone who's avoidant finally learns that closeness doesn't have to be dangerous, their capacity for love is enormous. They may show it differently, through actions, loyalty, problem-solving, or quiet presence, but don't mistake subtlety for lack of depth. If you love an avoidant, remember, you can invite them into safety, but you can't drag them into vulnerability. You can open the door, but they have to step through it. And if you are the avoidant, remember this, your heart isn't the problem. Your fear isn't the enemy. The walls you built kept you safe once, but now they're keeping you alone. And you deserve more than emotional survival. You deserve connection, joy, and the kind of love that doesn't feel like a threat, but a home. Avoidants aren't emotionless. They shut down because closeness activates deep, overwhelming feelings that they never learned how to manage. On the surface, they may look calm, detached, or uninterested, but inside, their emotional world is often anything but quiet. Many avoidant individuals grew up in environments where expressing needs, showing vulnerability, or relying on others didn't lead to comfort. It may have led to disappointment, rejection, or a sense of being too much. Over time, the safest strategy became minimizing those needs altogether, not because they didn't have them, but because acknowledging them felt like the first step into danger. So when an avoidant person starts to form a meaningful connection, it can unintentionally stir up emotions they've spent years learning to suppress. Something as simple as a partner asking what's going on inside or can we talk about us can hit them much harder than they will ever admit. Those questions reach into a part of them they rarely let anyone touch. Their instinctive response isn't, "I don't care," but rather, "I can't handle this right now." And instead of expressing that fear out loud, which itself would require vulnerability, they withdraw into silence, distraction, or emotional distance. It looks like indifference, but it's really self-protection. Imagine someone who has spent years building emotional armor. When real intimacy approaches, it feels like cracks are forming in that armor. Even positive emotions, love, excitement, connection, can feel threatening because they open the door to potential loss. The avoidant person may start worrying subconsciously, what if I depend on you and you disappear? What if I let you in and you hurt me? What if I reveal too much and it changes the way you see me? These thoughts rarely get spoken. They simply show up in behavior, pulling away, changing the subject, shutting down, or focusing on tasks instead of feelings. This internal intensity is the reason avoidants often seem calm on the outside while battling a storm inside. Their nervous system reacts to closeness the way others might react to conflict. They become hyper-aware, tense, and guarded. The more they care about someone, the more exposed they feel, and the more their fear-driven instincts activate. It's not the presence of love that scares them, it's the vulnerability that comes with it. This is why avoidants frequently confuse partners. One moment they may show affection, gentleness, or attentiveness, and the next moment they seem to vanish behind a wall. It's not that their feelings disappeared, it's that their defenses kicked in. Caring deeply is the very trigger for their retreat. Their emotional system gets overwhelmed, and instead of leaning in, they lean out. not because they want distance, but because they need to feel regulated again. Underneath their quiet exterior, there's a deep desire for connection paired with an equally deep fear of what connection requires. And that inner tug of war is what makes avoidants seem like they don't feel much, when in truth, they often feel far more than they know how to express. Their distancing behavior is rooted in past experiences where vulnerability felt unsafe or exposed, and those early emotional lessons become powerful, often unconscious rules they follow in adulthood. For many avoidant individuals, the idea of relying on someone else was once associated with disappointment or inconsistency. Maybe they reached out as a child and no one responded. Maybe they were encouraged to be independent too early, told not to cry, or made to feel like their emotional needs were burdens. Over time, they learned that the safest way to get through life was to not need anyone at all. These early experiences create a deep internal script that says closeness is risky. When someone gets too close emotionally, it activates those old memories, even if the person in front of them today is kind, supportive, and trustworthy. Their body reacts before their mind can even process it. Their heart rate might rise, their thoughts may scramble, and a kind of emotional claustrophobia can settle in. To regain control, they pull back, not out of malice, but because distance brings relief. It's the only strategy that's ever made them feel stable. This instinctive retreat isn't about the current relationship being wrong. It's about old wounds being touched in a way that feels eerily familiar. If vulnerability once resulted in shame, criticism, or emotional neglect, then opening up becomes a terrifying prospect. Even neutral or positive moments, like someone expressing affection or asking for connection, can feel like pressure. And pressure is what their nervous system has spent years trying to avoid. They're often operating from fear rather than intention. A partner might interpret their withdrawal as a lack of love, but in reality, the avoidant person is trying to prevent pain. They might think, if I don't get too close, I can't get hurt, even when they're desperately wanting connection. This paradox, wanting closeness while fearing it, creates behavior that feels confusing and inconsistent to others. Their fear of vulnerability also shows up in how they communicate. Talking about feelings can feel like stepping onto an emotional minefield. Revealing too much is interpreted as giving someone leverage. Anything that invites emotional exposure, difficult conversations, stating needs, admitting worry, feels unsafe because it threatens the fragile sense of independence they've worked hard to maintain. Independence, for many avoidants, isn't just a preference, it's a shield. When their partner seeks reassurance, they may feel pressured. When someone asks for emotional depth, they may feel invaded. When the relationship becomes too close, they may feel overwhelmed. These reactions aren't about rejecting the person. They're about avoiding the emotional experiences that once taught them that closeness leads to pain. Their entire pattern of behavior is a defense against vulnerability. They aren't trying to be distant, they're trying to stay safe. And safety for them was never found in the territory of emotional closeness. It was found in self-reliance, emotional control, and keeping others at arm's length. So when someone tries to step inside those boundaries, even with love, it touches a history that still lives quietly beneath the surface. Avoidant withdrawal often happens when things start to feel too good, not because they don't care, but because the experience of closeness activates a level of emotional intensity they aren't prepared to handle. When the connection is light, casual, or predictable, they can stay present. But the moment the relationship deepens, when the other person becomes emotionally important, their internal alarms begin to sound. They sense the stakes rising, and with it comes a wave of fear they don't always understand or know how to explain. The positive feelings themselves can be the trigger, because caring deeply means they now have something they could lose. For an avoidant person, closeness is a double-edged sword. On one side, it offers comfort, warmth, and the possibility of true connection. On the other, it opens the door to vulnerability, expectations, and the risk of emotional pain. When they begin to feel attached, they also begin to feel exposed. That exposure can feel overwhelming, especially if they were raised in environments where emotional intimacy wasn't modeled, valued, or safe. So when someone gets close enough to elicit real emotions, their instinct is to protect themselves before they get hurt. The withdrawal can look like taking space, becoming quiet, focusing on work, or suddenly showing less affection. It might show up as irritation, defensiveness, or a sudden shift from warmth to distance. To the partner, it feels confusing and contradictory, but internally, the avoidant person is trying to regain control over emotions that feel too strong. Feeling good is not the problem. Feeling good and dependent is. It challenges their long-held belief that independence equals safety. What makes this dynamic even more complex is that avoidants often don't consciously recognize that things feeling good is the very reason they're pulling away. To them, the retreat might feel practical or logical. They may think they need space, that emotions are moving too fast, or that they're losing themselves. But underneath those rationalizations lies an emotional system trying to regulate itself back to what feels normal. Less intensity, less closeness, less vulnerability. Ironically, the more they care about someone, the more their protective strategies activate. The affection they feel doesn't disappear when they withdraw. It simply becomes overshadowed by their fear of being hurt or overwhelmed. They might long for connection while simultaneously pushing it away, creating an inner conflict that can leave both partners feeling misunderstood. This pattern becomes especially visible in moments when the relationship takes a step forward, deeper conversations, increased commitment, displays of affection, or experiences that reinforce emotional intimacy. These moments should strengthen the bond, but for an avoidant person, they can trigger the instinct to retreat. It's as if their heart leans in while their defense system screams, "This is too much." The internal battle isn't about rejecting the person they care about, it's about managing the emotional weight that comes with caring so deeply. What looks like sabotaging the relationship is actually an attempt to self-regulate. The avoidant person is trying to calm the emotional surge that closeness creates. But unfortunately, the strategy that brings them relief, withdrawal, often brings their partner confusion and pain. This isn't because the avoidant lacks love, but because love exposes a part of them that still believes connection is dangerous. Avoidants express love differently, often through steadiness, actions, or subtle commitment, because open emotional expression feels foreign or risky to them. They may not use big romantic gestures or flowery language, but that doesn't mean they aren't deeply invested. In fact, many avoidant individuals show their care in ways that are quieter, more practical, and sometimes so understated that their partner may miss the significance. Yet to the avoidant person, these behaviors are meaningful signs of connection, offering help, fixing something, showing up when it matters, giving advice, or making sure their partner is safe. These actions are often their equivalent of saying, "I love you," even if the words rarely come out. For someone with an avoidant style, feelings are easier to manage when grounded in action rather than spoken. Talking about emotions requires vulnerability, while doing something helpful allows them to contribute without feeling exposed. They might feel awkward, tense, or overwhelmed when expected to discuss what they feel, but they'll quietly go out of their way to make life easier for the person they care about. This is why many avoidants are incredibly loyal, dedicated partners once they feel secure. Their love is steady, consistent, and often dependable, even if it's not loudly expressed. Avoidants also tend to demonstrate commitment by making space in their routines, which is a much bigger step for them than it may appear. Letting someone into their habits, their personal time, or their carefully structured world is an enormous sign of trust. They may not launch into emotional confessions, but if they regularly choose to spend time with someone when they could be alone, that choice carries weight. Time to an avoidant person is often one of the most sincere offerings they can give. It's their way of saying, "You matter enough to me to share the part of my life I usually keep to myself." They can also show love through reliability. If they say they will do something, they will. If someone they care about is in trouble, they'll show up. They might not always understand emotional nuance, but they excel at taking concrete steps to support the people they love. Their calm presence in a crisis, their ability to stay composed, and their problem-solving tendencies often come from a genuine desire to protect and provide stability. This practicality is not a sign of distance. It is, in many ways, their version of emotional intimacy because they are uncomfortable with vulnerability. Avoidance may also demonstrate love, By respecting boundaries, giving space, and avoiding unnecessary drama, what might seem like detachment can actually be their way of preserving harmony and showing consideration. They value emotional regulation and often assume that giving someone space to breathe is a form of care. Their expressions of love are subtle, sometimes almost hidden, but they are real. They might not be the ones to pour their hearts out or initiate deeply emotional conversations, yet their actions, patterns, and quiet consistency tell a story. While their partners might wish for more verbal affirmation, the avoidant person is often saying, "I love you" in the only way that feels safe to them, through loyalty, presence, thoughtfulness, and a steady commitment that speaks louder than their words ever could. Healing requires safety, patience, and recognizing that old protective walls may no longer serve them, and this process often unfolds slowly, sometimes so subtly that the avoidant person isn't even aware of the changes taking place. For someone who has spent years relying on emotional distance as a survival strategy, the idea of letting those walls down can feel like stepping into unfamiliar terrain. Their defenses were built for a reason. They kept the person safe during moments when vulnerability meant pain or disappointment. But as life changes and relationships deepen, those same defenses can begin to limit them, quietly preventing them from experiencing the closeness they secretly long for. The first step in healing is creating a sense of safety. Avoidant individuals open up not when pressured, but when they feel accepted exactly as they are. They need reassurance, not through words alone, but through consistent actions, that vulnerability won't be used against them. When they are met with patience instead of panic, curiosity instead of criticism, and steadiness instead of intensity, their nervous system slowly learns that closeness doesn't always equal danger. This is not a quick shift. It's a gradual rewiring that happens through repeated experiences of feeling safe in someone else's presence. Patience plays an enormous role in this transformation. Avoidants often move at a slower emotional pace, not because they lack interest, but because their internal world is playing catch up. They may need time to process feelings, time to adapt to closeness, and time to unlearn the instinct to retreat the moment emotions grow stronger. Rushing them only reinforces the very fear that keeps them distant. But when they are allowed to move forward at a pace that feels manageable, they begin to test vulnerability in small ways, opening up a bit more, sharing a personal story, admitting a fear, or letting themselves rely on someone for support. Even as they grow, avoidant individuals often don't realize that the very walls they built are no longer protecting them, they're confining them. Those walls were constructed during moments of emotional scarcity when independence felt like the only reliable form of control. But as their circumstances evolve, meeting supportive people, having stable relationships, experiencing trust, they begin to see that the strategies that once kept them safe may now be keeping them alone. This recognition is powerful. It marks the moment they realize that the life they want requires a different type of courage, the courage to be seen, known, and emotionally available. Healing doesn't mean the fear disappears. It means they learn to act even when the fear whispers in the background. It means choosing connection even when withdrawing feels easier. It means letting someone get close enough to matter, even though that closeness comes with risk. Over time, the avoidant person discovers that vulnerability isn't a weakness to be defended against. It's the bridge to the connection they've quietly craved all along. Through safety, patience, and gradual self-awareness, they learn that love doesn't have to be a battlefield. It can be a place where their heart finally rests. When we finally understand avoidance, not as people who lack emotion, but as people who feel so deeply they've learned to protect themselves, we start to see the truth behind their distance. Their quietness isn't emptiness, their space isn't rejection, their hesitation isn't a lack of care. It's the echo of old wounds trying to keep them safe the only way they know how. And when those walls start to soften, when they allow someone in, even a little, that is not a small gesture, that is courage in its purest form. So whether you love an avoidant or you are one, remember this: growth doesn't come from forcing vulnerability. It comes from creating the kind of safety where vulnerability becomes a choice a gentle place where their guard can finally relax, where connection isn't a threat, but a home they step into at their own pace. Healing is possible not through pressure, but through patience, not through demand, but through understanding, not through perfection, but through presence. Thank you for listening, for caring enough to understand a part of the human heart that often goes unseen. Your time, your attention, and your willingness to learn mean more than you know. I appreciate you being here, and I hope something in these words stays with you long after today. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Thank you.